Alrighty everybody, welcome to this Mythic Plus video. I'm going to talk about how to be a little more effective as an Arcane Mage in Mythic Pluses. And I got five big pointers. The first of which is going to be mana and how you drink with your mana. Obviously everybody asks for a mage table right as you start, but I advise you to pick up quite a few of those cookies beforehand. One thing in terms of drinking to be able to allow you to output a lot more damage is being able to blink ahead of the group and position yourself well so that as soon as the pack's done and you drop combat, that you can drink for just a couple seconds on almost every pull. Doing that may not seem like a lot, but if you can gain back another 30-40% mana, that's that much more mana that you can drink and have, and that much more damage you can output without having to evocate, or mana to have when your evocation's on cooldown. So that's probably the biggest number one, and over the course of a 20-minute dungeon, that'll make a huge difference. The second thing I wanted to go over is using your utility as a mage, and even more utility as an Arcane Mage. One of the big things that you have is Ice Barrier, and you want to make sure you almost keep that on cooldown. You can see right now I don't have it up, but it's off cooldown. Just being able to keep that on you for some weeks, that's going to be the difference between dying and staying alive. So having that up and making sure you're putting it up when you don't have it up is going to really help your team, as well as knowing when your interrupt is off cooldown and when you can use it, and which mobs to use it on, and which spells you need to interrupt, as well as Greater Invis is a great way to save your life as well. If you take about half your health and damage, you can pop Greater Invis and you should be able to be topped off quite easily. Also using your displacement effectively on a lot of boss encounters. You can keep from moving just by using blink or shimmer, and then as soon as a swirly pops underneath you or you need to move for whatever reason, you can just displace right back to where you were, because you have a pretty large window for that. As well as spell steal. A lot of people don't utilize that spell very well, and I know in Arcway you can spell steal haste buffs, and so knowing what you can and can't spell steal and when to use it, how to use it, can really help your raid. Instead of buffing your enemies, so you can buff yourself. Supernova is a knock-up and another way to interrupt casts. There's also any racials that you might have, so I have Gift of the Naru, other people might have an AoE silence, and knowing when to poly on Nell Slayer is a good example. When you're going against a bunch of pelters, you can, if you're on a higher end Mythic Plus, you can poly one of them to keep the pelters from killing you. Same thing once you get to the scorpions at the end. If you can CC those pelters and then just kill the scorpions, that makes it a little easier. And then something that's probably not even on your bars is Frost Nova. And using that can really help if your tank needs to kite for necrotic. And so something like that can really come in handy if you know how to use it. And that's a great way to improve in Mythic Pluses so far. Another thing is, I kind of hinged on it before, but your mana usage. A lot of people are hesitant to use cooldowns and use all your mana in Mythic Plus. But using your mana and making sure you're using all of it that you can is going to be a huge difference between damage output in a Mythic Plus between you and maybe something like a Fire Mage, or you and a good Arcane Mage. Is that you have to manage your mana properly, otherwise you don't do an effective amount of damage. And so some of it comes with practice and doing a dungeon. For example, on this Eye of Azshara, you could probably drop your cooldowns, all of your mana, and evocate, and get to the boss, and have it back up in time to be able to nuke the boss down with hero. But knowing those timings kind of, You learn that as you go, and sometimes it's easier to judge, sometimes it's not, but that'll be the difference between making you effective and not. And so that same thing goes with trinkets, procs, rings, whatever you might have, and using your potions of prolonged power. Just having those and using those on cooldown will make a big difference, especially in a really high-end Mythic Plus, and making it go a lot faster. And the last thing I wanted to go over is just knowing the dungeon and the affixes that you're dealing with. The other day I started a +7 Nelfy, and we were doing necrotic, and our tank didn't even know what necrotic was. Like, he was killing a mob and he would run in and pull the next pack before his stacks reset, and he wiped about the first 3 times and everyone left. Obviously that's a little more intense of an example, but knowing your affixes is really will make the difference in a dungeon. If you know you have raging and all the mobs are gonna enrage at 30%, knowing that you don't just want to run in and AoE everything flat, you're gonna want to single target something down to about 50%. And if you have 2 mobs, you can AoE and then AoE till the one's down and then start on the second mob. Just knowing how to approach that. Or if you have bolstering, knowing you can AoE, and then if one of the targets is a mob with more hit points, or for whatever reason is higher on health, you can drop your arcane missiles on that instead of killing a mob when you know it's going to bolster the other one. And the same thing goes for volcanic. If you're running a volcanic dungeon, I would advise you not to run Rune of Power, even though most people would say just get good, because you can't really see the volcanic under your Rune of Power. But if you go into a dungeon not knowing the affixes and how to approach them correctly, and even if people in your team don't know how to do it, you're really going to struggle in comparison to what you could do if you knew it. So just to quickly recap those, just making sure you get ahead to drink mana. See right here, I'm ahead of the entire pack, drinking mana. In my Evos off cooldown, I would have been able to do 0 to none damage had I had no mana. So doing that, using your utility, whether that's Ice Nova, your Polymorphs, your Spell Steals, your Interrupts, Ice Barrier, keeping that up, your Displacement, Supernova for knockups, and even saving your Arcane Missile procs for when they're necessary for maybe raging, or really just about any time in a dungeon that you notice. And then the next big thing was using your mana and your cooldowns, and using them often and appropriately, and making sure to time them well with the bosses. A lot of times if you get in and you don't have arcane power up when you start a boss pool, but you have enough mana, or your Evo is going to be off cooldown soon, you can start a boss pool without arcane power. You don't need it, because you could drain a whole bar, evocate up, and then arcane power, and you'll still get it in there. Most boss fights last more than a minute and 30 seconds, so you have a short cooldown, and so you have an advantage in that department, that you don't have a 3-minute cooldown, which makes it really hard to use in dungeons. The next and last is knowing the affixes and how to approach them, how your team's going to approach them, having interrupt rotations, and making sure everybody does know those things. And if you use these tips, you really will be a better Mythic Plus dungeoneer, if that's what you want to call it. And you won't be frowned upon for bringing in Arcane Mage, because you do have a lot of utilities, and if you're drinking your mana often enough and using your cooldowns frequently, you'll output DPS on par with most other classes. So thanks for watching the video. If you learned anything or you liked the video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and you can follow me on Twitter, not Twitch, well, Twitch too, I guess, and see when I go live and get updates through there, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks.